hadn't planned on fainting that night. One minute, I was standing in the middle of my own art exhibit, trying to look composed while people murmured about my work, and the next, everything went white around the edges. The last thing I remember was someone's voice asking if I was okay, echoing through a tunnel. Then came the floor, and the sound of glass shattering somewhere close by. When I came to, I was lying on a couch in the gallery office, my friend Lauren hovering over me, panic in her eyes. "You need to see a doctor," she said, her voice more serious than I'd ever heard it. "You've been working nonstop. You barely sleep. You can't keep doing this." I wanted to argue, to say I was fine, but the truth was I wasn't. The weeks leading up to the exhibition had been a blur of deadlines, anxiety, and late nights filled with caffeine instead of rest. My body was simply done pretending. The next morning, I found myself standing outside Greystone Medical Clinic, a sleek building with tinted windows that made it look more like an art gallery than a doctor's office. My hands were shaking slightly, though I wasn't sure if it was from nerves or exhaustion. At the reception desk, a woman smiled and asked my name. "Eli Turner," I managed, and she nodded, clicking through her computer. "Dr. Cole will see you shortly. Have a seat, please." I took a seat in the quiet waiting room. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain. It had just started to drizzle outside. I watched raindrops trace slow, uneven lines down the window, feeling oddly calm. Then a voice, low and clear, broke through the hum of silence. "Eli Turner?" I looked up. Standing by the door was a man. Tall, probably mid-40s, with dark hair touched by gray near the temples and a kind of quiet steadiness in his posture. His white coat was unbuttoned, sleeves slightly rolled. He looked more like a professor than a doctor. "I'm Dr. Cole," he said, offering a small, polite smile. "Come on in." The exam room was simple. Pale walls, a window overlooking the street, a faint scent of pine from whatever disinfectant they used. I sat on the edge of the bed while he flipped through my file. His voice was calm when he spoke. "So, you fainted at an event," he said. "Have you experienced that before?" "Not exactly," I admitted. "I think I just pushed myself too hard." He looked up, and his eyes met mine for the first time. They were gray, not cold but observant, like he was trying to see more than what I was saying. "How's your sleep?" "Non-existent." "And food? Coffee counts, right?" That earned a small, quiet laugh. "I see." He jotted something down, then asked about my schedule, stress, history, family background. I answered as honestly as I could, though part of me felt exposed. Not just physically, sitting there under sterile light, but emotionally, as if his questions were cutting closer than they should. When he asked if I had been feeling dizzy before the collapse, I hesitated. "Sometimes, especially when I forget to eat." He nodded, then moved to the cabinet. "Let's check a few things." His tone was professional, measured, but there was something else beneath it, a warmth that didn't belong to routine. He asked me to take off my jacket, then gently placed a stethoscope against my chest. "Breathe in." The air caught in my throat. His touch was firm but careful, the metal cold against my skin. The room was silent except for the faint rhythm of my heartbeat in his ears. "Again," he said softly. His voice lowered, almost a whisper. I followed, focusing on the rhythm of breath and the sound of rain against the window. Something in that moment, maybe the stillness, maybe his quiet patience, made the air between us feel heavier than it should. He moved the stethoscope to my back, his hand brushing my shoulder lightly. "You've been under a lot of stress," he said, not as a question, but as if he already knew. "I guess that's obvious," I said, trying to smile. "It's written all over you," he replied gently. Then, after a pause, "You'll need a closer exam." He said it quietly, as he closed the door with a soft click. For a second, my pulse jumped. Not from fear, but from something I didn't quite understand. But nothing inappropriate followed. He simply took my blood pressure, checked reflexes, pulse, pupils, all the clinical things he was supposed to do. And yet, every motion carried an undertone of care, a deliberate patience that made me feel seen. When he was done, he leaned against the counter, writing notes. "Physically, you're okay. Dehydration, exhaustion, maybe anxiety. You've pushed too far, for too long. I've been told that before, I said quietly. He looked up. And have you listened before? I smiled faintly. No. Something softened in his expression. Not pity, but recognition. You should, he said. Your body is trying to get your attention. There was a long pause. He removed his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, then looked back at me. Eli, do you have someone to talk to? About the pressure, the stress. I hesitated. Not really. I don't like being a burden. His voice gentled even more. You're not one. You just need to stop carrying everything alone. Shouldn't have meant so much, but it did. No one had said that to me in a long time, not like they meant it. When he finished, he handed me a card with a follow-up appointment written neatly on the back. Come back in a week. We'll run a few more tests, just to make sure there's nothing else going on. And get some rest. As I left the room, I caught a glimpse of him through the glass door, writing something in my file, then pausing, as if lost in thought. Outside, the drizzle had turned into a steady rain. I pulled up my hood and walked down the empty street, heart heavier than before but in a strangely comforting way, like I'd been seen and touched by something I wasn't supposed to feel. That night, I sat at my desk, sketchbook open, charcoal in hand. I didn't plan what to draw. I just let my hand move. By the time I looked down, I'd filled the page with a pair of gray eyes, drawn from memory. I stared at them for a long time, my fingers smudged with charcoal. I told myself it was just practice, just art. But somewhere deep inside, I knew it wasn't. Something had shifted in me at that clinic. Something quiet and dangerous and undeniably human. And I had no idea what to do with it. The week passed slower than I expected. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same gray eyes in flashes, calm, assessing, but full of something I couldn't quite name. I told myself I was just curious, that it was normal to think about a doctor who had been kind when I was at my worst. But kindness shouldn't echo like that. It shouldn't follow you into sleep. By the time my follow-up appointment came, I'd convinced myself it was just routine. Nothing more. Still, I caught myself checking my reflection twice before leaving the house. The morning light slanted across Greystone Medical Clinic when I arrived. The waiting room was nearly empty this time. The rain gone, replaced by a dull gray sky. The receptionist smiled. Dr. Cole will be right with you. When the door opened, I felt that same strange calm wash over me. Eli, he said simply, like we were old acquaintances. His voice carried quiet familiarity, and something else beneath it, relief, maybe. Come in. The room hadn't changed, but it felt different now, warmer somehow. He gestured for me to sit while flipping through my chart. Your tests came back clean, he said. No major deficiencies or heart irregularities. Your body's fine. It's the rest of you that needs attention. The rest of me? I repeated with a wry smile. That's a lot of territory. He looked up. I know the signs. You're running on empty. You can't pour from that. I laughed softly. You sound like my therapist. Do you have one? No. He paused, leaning back in his chair, fingers interlaced. Then maybe you should. There was no judgment in his tone, only quiet sincerity. He wasn't trying to fix me. He just didn't want to see me unravel. He stood and moved toward the small counter at the back of the room. Would you like tea? I keep some here. It's chamomile. I blinked. You make tea for your patients? He gave a faint smile. Only the ones who forget to eat breakfast. I accepted the cup, its warmth grounding my hands. We talked while the steam curled between us, first about the medical stuff, then about the sleepless nights. Somehow, that led to conversations about art, color, and the way loneliness creeps into a canvas no matter how bright the paint. He asked what I painted. Mostly people, I said. Faces. Moments that don't last. He tilted his head slightly. You capture what disappears. That's the goal, I murmured, before it leaves. He nodded, as though he understood more than I'd said. Silence settled for a moment. Not uncomfortable, just waited. The kind of silence where two people are aware of each other too clearly. I broke it with a nervous laugh. You sound like someone who's read a lot of books. Occupational hazard, he said. I used to read to keep my mind off the hospital at night. Now I read because it's quieter than thinking. What do you read? Lately? Philosophy. Camus, Frankl. The ones that make you question why you got out of bed. Sounds uplifting. He smiled faintly. Sometimes honesty is better than comfort. There was something in that line, the way he said it, that made my chest tighten. It wasn't flirtation. Not yet. But there was an awareness that shouldn't have been there. When he took my blood pressure again, his hand brushed my wrist. Professional, brief. Yet I felt it all the way to my throat. He didn't seem to notice, or maybe he did and pretended not to. Afterward, he walked me to the door himself. The gesture felt unnecessary, but meaningful, like a quiet promise of care beyond the appointment. Get some rest, he said. Try a full meal tonight. Something with real nutrients. Like pizza? He laughed. Really laughed this time, and it was the first sound that made the sterile hallway feel alive. Maybe something green, too. I wanted to say something else. Something that would keep the moment from ending, but the words didn't come. So I left with the faint smell of chamomile and antiseptic clinging to my jacket. A week later, I went back. Not because I had to, but because he'd asked me to check in. It was supposed to be a quick visit. Instead, it became another hour of conversation that had little to do with my health. He asked about my painting again, about the gallery that caused my collapse. I showed him a picture on my phone. A portrait of a woman looking away, her expression unreadable. She looks like she's keeping a secret, he said. Maybe she is. He studied the screen a little too long. You put yourself into your work. Don't we all? His eyes lifted then, and for a moment I wasn't sure if we were still talking about art. He looked away first, clearing his throat. Your vitals are improving. Sleep. Better. Some nights. He nodded. You're healing faster than expected. Maybe it's the company, I said lightly, then instantly regretted it. His pen froze mid-scribble. For half a second, I thought I'd crossed a line. But then he smiled. Small. Real. Company helps, he murmured, then changed the subject, asking about vitamins. The rest of the appointment blurred by in professional routine. But when he handed me the follow-up slip, our fingers brushed. An instant, accidental contact, and it sent something warm through me that shouldn't have been there. Over the next month, the pattern repeated. Every appointment started with small talk and ended with a silence I couldn't interpret. Sometimes I caught him watching me. Not inappropriately, but with a kind of careful curiosity. I began to notice the little things. How he always rolled his sleeves halfway up before taking my pulse. How his voice lowered when he explained something, as though he didn't want the world outside the room to hear. How he walked me out personally every single time, even when the hallway was full of other patients waiting. Once, while guiding me through a relaxation exercise, his hand rested on my shoulder for a heartbeat too long. He realized it too, his fingers tensed slightly, then withdrew. Sorry, he said. Force of habit. I smiled, pretending it didn't matter. You're fine. But when I left, I could still feel that touch like a ghost under my shirt. I started drawing again at night, always from memory. The sketches began to fill my notebooks. A profile, a shadowed jawline, a pair of hands holding a stethoscope. Each one looked more like him than the last. I told myself it was just observation, an artist's habit. But it wasn't. Not really. Something about him had found its way under my skin, quiet but undeniable. One evening, as I walked out of the clinic, the receptionist smiled knowingly. You've been coming here a lot lately. I froze. Yeah, I guess I have. She grinned. Dr. Cole must be doing something right. Yeah, I said softly, more to myself than to her. He is. Outside, the evening air was cool, the city humming with life. I walked slowly, half listening to the rhythm of passing cars, half listening to the pulse inside me that no stethoscope could explain. Was it care I was feeling, or something I wasn't ready to name? I didn't know. All I knew was that when Dr. Adrian Cole smiled, even just a little. Something inside me began to believe in healing again. And for now, that was enough. The sky that evening looked bruised, low and heavy, the kind of gray that promises a storm before the city even realizes it. I'd been working nonstop for 3 days, chasing deadlines and forgetting meals again. When the first roll of thunder hit, it startled something in me I didn't expect. A sharp, familiar panic that made my chest tighten and my hands tremble. By the time the rain came, I was already outside, walking aimlessly, hoping the air would help me breathe. But it didn't. The downpour hit suddenly, sheets of water blurring the streetlights, soaking through my clothes in seconds. I wasn't far from Greystone Medical Clinic, and before I knew it, my feet had carried me there like muscle memory. The glass doors were half-locked, closing hours long past, but I could see the faint glow of light inside. I hesitated, dripping on the steps, feeling ridiculous for even thinking about it. Then the lightning cracked again, and my body decided before my mind could stop it. I knocked. Moments later, the door opened, and there he was, Dr. Adrian Cole. His expression shifted from surprise to concern in a heartbeat. "Eli? What are you? You're drenched." I didn't know where else to go," I stammered, shivering. I couldn't breathe for a bit." He didn't ask questions, just stepped aside and said, "Come in." The clinic was quiet, the kind of silence that felt sacred, like a space that belonged only to ghosts and memory. The waiting room lights were dimmed. Rain hammered against the windows, relentless. Adrian disappeared into a cabinet and returned with a towel. "Sit," he said gently, placing it over my shoulders. "You're shaking." "I'm fine," I lied, voice unsteady. "You're not." His tone wasn't scolding, just steady, like he was reminding me that it was okay to not be. He crouched in front of me, eyes searching my face. "How long have you felt like this?" I wanted to say just tonight, but honesty slipped out instead. "Weeks, maybe months. It comes and goes." He nodded slowly, as if that confirmed something he already knew. Then he placed his hand against my chest, right over my heart. "Breathe with me," he said quietly. "In and out." His palm was warm, steady pressure grounding me where I sat. The air felt thick between us, full of something unspoken. I focused on his rhythm, on the way his thumb moved slightly in time with my breath, and for a moment, the world narrowed to the sound of rain and his voice guiding me through it. When my heartbeat steadied, he withdrew his hand, but not right away, just long enough that I noticed the space he left behind. "I'm sorry," I murmured, embarrassed. "I didn't mean to just show up like this." "Don't apologize," he said, standing. "You did the right thing." He poured tea chamomile again and handed me a cup. The steam curled up like breath between us. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm. "I used to love the rain," I said softly. "It made me feel small in a good way. Lately, it just feels heavier." He leaned against the counter, arms folded. "That's what burnout does. It steals the beauty from ordinary things." I nodded. "You sound like you've been there." He hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Once or twice, maybe more." For the first time, he didn't sound like a doctor. He sounded human, tired maybe, but honest. I looked up at him. The overhead light caught in the strands of gray in his hair. There was no wedding ring. I'd never noticed before, but now the absence of it drew my attention like a confession. "You ever get lonely here?" I asked. He blinked, caught off guard. "Lonely? Working late, seeing people fall apart, helping them piece back together but never really." I trailed off, not sure how to finish. He exhaled, long and slow. "Sometimes," he said finally. "I used to think I could handle it, the distance, the professionalism. But the truth is, caring about people, it leaves marks." Something about the way he said that made my throat tighten. I stared into my tea. "So you do care?" He looked at me then, really looked. "Of course I do." Our eyes held for a moment too long. The rain outside softened into a quiet drizzle, like the world was catching its breath with us. "Being different doesn't make it easier," I said quietly, unsure why the words left my mouth. He didn't ask what I meant. Maybe he didn't need to. His gaze was steady, understanding, like he knew exactly what I was trying not to say. Different, he echoed. That's one word for it. We both smiled, small, tired, knowing smiles, and it was the first time I felt seen without having to explain myself. Time passed without either of us moving. I watched the rain slide down the glass, the tea cooling in my hands. The fluorescent lights flickered once, then steadied. The clinic felt less like a place of medicine and more like a shelter, a fragile pause between two worlds. Adrian finally glanced at the clock. It's late. You should get home before the streets flood. I didn't bring an umbrella. He chuckled softly. Of course you didn't. He walked over to a small coat rack, grabbed a black umbrella, and opened the door for me. The air outside was cool and damp, the smell of rain clean and new. He held the umbrella over us as we stepped out together, the fabric drumming softly above our heads. The space between us was small, our shoulders brushing once, then again. Each accidental touch felt deliberate somehow. Neither of us spoke at first. The sound of water dripping from the eaves filled the silence. Thank you, I said finally, for everything. For not making me feel stupid for showing up. You weren't stupid, he said. You were human. We stopped at the curb. The street was slick with reflected light. I could see the faint reflection of us. Two figures under one umbrella, and for some reason the sight made my chest ache. He turned toward me, his face half lit by the street lamp. You're stronger than you think, Eli. But you can't keep doing this alone. I swallowed. And what about you? He smiled faintly. Maybe I'll take my own advice someday. The rain eased to a mist. He closed the umbrella and stood there for a moment, hesitant. The kind of hesitation that feels like an unspoken truth pressing against both sides of a wall. He said goodnight like he didn't want to. I would think later, replaying that night in my mind, and I answered like I was afraid to. When I finally turned to walk away, I could still feel the warmth of his hand against my chest. Steady, real, as if part of the storm had stayed with me, waiting to return. The message came on a Thursday morning, short, polite, and distant. Eli, I'll have to cancel our next appointment. I'm taking some personal leave. I'll refer you to another physician if needed. AC. I read it 3 times before the words began to sting. Personal leave. Not vacation, not sick leave, personal. It was strange how heavy that word felt when attached to him. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that I was just another patient on his schedule. But the truth was harder to swallow. I'd built my week around those quiet hours in his clinic. Maybe it wasn't healthy. Maybe it was foolish. But those appointments had become the one place where I felt steady, seen. And now, just like that, it was gone. I drafted 6 replies, all versions of hope you're okay, but deleted them each time. Anything I sent would feel like too much or not enough. So I said nothing. Days turned to weeks. The first few were restless, like withdrawal. I'd wake early, expecting the faint anxiety of preparing to see him, only to remember I had nowhere to be. My art sat unfinished. The colors on my palette dried untouched. Friends texted, asking if I wanted to hang out. I said I was busy. I wasn't. I was just waiting for a name that wouldn't appear in my inbox again. At night, I'd walk the city streets, hoping the noise would drown out the silence he left behind. Didn't. Every passerby, every gray coat in the distance, felt like a false start of recognition. I tried going to another doctor once. She was kind, professional, efficient, but it felt like being in a room that had the right furniture but none of the warmth. I answered her questions, took my prescriptions, and left. Empty. Loneliness, I learned, has a strange way of clarifying things. It makes you realize how much of yourself you've given to the spaces between someone else's words. 3 weeks later, I found him again, by accident. It was raining, not heavily, just enough to blur the edges of the world. I ducked into a small cafe on Willow Street, the kind that always smelled of cinnamon and burnt espresso. I was halfway through ordering when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Eli? I turned, and there he was. No white coat this time. Just jeans, a gray sweater, and a hint of surprise softening into a smile. His hair looked slightly longer, his eyes a little less guarded. "Dr. Cole?" I said before catching myself. "Sorry, Adrian." He laughed quietly. "You can still call me that if you want." "I wasn't sure I'd see you again," I admitted. "Me neither," he said, with a tone that was both apology and relief. "Mind if I join you?" We took a corner table near the window. For a moment, it felt absurdly normal. Two people meeting by chance, sharing coffee as rain streaked the glass. But the familiarity came rushing back like muscle memory. His posture, his calm, even the way he stirred his drink before taking a sip. It all made something in me ache. "You look better," he said. "Rested." "Trying," I said, smiling faintly. "You disappeared." He looked down. "I needed time." "Time for what?" He hesitated, then sighed. "To think. About boundaries. About what I was doing. Or almost doing." I felt my pulse tighten. "You didn't do anything wrong." He met my gaze, steady but conflicted. "Didn't I? You came to me for help, and He stopped, searching for the right words. "You make me forget where my lines are." There it was, the confession neither of us had said aloud until now. The rain outside intensified, drumming harder against the glass. I wanted to say something that would undo the tension between us, but instead I said the only thing that felt honest. "Maybe they're not meant to be walls." His expression changed, something between surprise and fear. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, running a hand through his hair. "Eli, that's not fair." "I'm not asking for anything," I said quietly. I took a breath. "I just miss talking to you." He looked away, eyes fixed on the wet street. "You deserve someone who can show up without conditions." The words should have hurt more than they did. But there was no cruelty in them, only regret. We sat in silence for a while. The cafe was nearly empty. The barista hummed along to a song on the radio. Somewhere outside, a car splashed through a puddle. Adrian broke the quiet first. "I've been walking in the mornings again," he said softly. "It helps." I smiled faintly. "I've been painting again. The colors finally make sense." "Good," he said. "That's good." I wanted to reach across the table, to touch his hand, to remind him that whatever this was, connection, confusion, care, it wasn't something to fear. But I didn't. We both knew that if I did, the balance between us would shatter completely. Still, I could see it in his face. The same unspoken pull, the same battle between what was right and what was real. "Do you ever wish things were simpler?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Every day." The rain began to ease, thinning into mist. Time seemed to stretch and fold in that tiny cafe. Two people pretending to drink coffee while trying not to fall apart. Finally, he stood, slipping his coat on. "I should go," he said quietly. "I'm not ready to blur those lines again." I nodded, though the words landed like a dull ache. "I understand." He reached for his cup, then paused. "You're a good man, Eli. Don't let what you feel make you question that." "And you're better than you think," I said. That made him look up, startled, almost emotional, before he smiled again, softer this time. "Take care of yourself." "You too, Adrian." When he turned to leave, I watched him through the window as he stepped into the fading drizzle, his figure dissolving slowly into the gray of the city. He didn't look back, but part of me swore that when the wind shifted, I could feel something linger, the faint warmth of a connection neither of us could claim, but neither could deny. That night I tried to paint again. The canvas remained blank for hours before I finally traced the outline of two figures under a single umbrella, walking side by side but never quite touching. The title came easily, "The Distance Between," and when I put the brush down, I realized what hurt the most wasn't that he left. It was knowing he cared and still had to. It started again. The dizziness, the exhaustion, the nights of staring at the ceiling while the world spun in slow circles. I told myself it was just a bad week, that the stress would pass if I painted enough or drank enough coffee. But my body knew better. By the third day, I could barely keep food down. My hands trembled when I tried to sketch, and the room swayed every time I stood up. I ignored it until I couldn't anymore. Then, one evening, long after the sky had gone dark, there was a knock on my door. I opened it slowly, expecting a neighbor or food delivery. But there he was, Adrian. He wasn't in his usual pressed shirt or coat. Just a dark sweater, sleeves pushed up, concern etched deeply into his face. Rain dotted his hair and shoulders like he'd come straight through the storm without stopping. "I heard from the clinic," he said quietly. "They said you canceled your follow-up again." "I'm fine," I lied, gripping the doorframe to steady myself. He frowned. "You don't look fine." Before I could protest, he stepped inside, uninvited but not unwelcome. He glanced around my small apartment, his gaze lingering on the cluttered table, the half-finished sketches, the cold cup of tea by the sink. "You've been pushing yourself again," he said. It wasn't a question. I sighed. "It's what I do best." He looked at me for a long moment, then quietly said, "Sit down." There was something in his tone, firm, familiar, that made me obey without thinking. He found my wrist, checking my pulse the way he used to, his touch gentle but grounding. The contact made my skin hum with awareness. "Still racing," he murmured. "You've been anxious for days, haven't you?" I nodded, unable to meet his eyes. He released my wrist but stayed close. "You can't keep doing this alone, Eli. Maybe I don't know how to do anything else." Silence stretched between us, heavy but safe, the kind that invited honesty rather than avoided it. Adrian finally spoke. "You should have called me." "I didn't think I could," I said softly. "You left." He winced, guilt flickering in his eyes. "I know. I thought I was protecting us both." "From what?" "From myself." The words hung there, raw and trembling. He sat down across from me, elbows resting on his knees. "You make me forget how to be careful," he said. "That's not your fault. It's mine. I've built my life on boundaries, on control, and somehow you walk in and everything I've built starts to feel meaningless." I swallowed hard. "Then why are you here?" He looked up, and for the first time, I saw him without the mask of composure. "Because I couldn't stay away anymore." The confession hit me like warmth after a long freeze. My chest ached, not from illness this time, but from something far more dangerous. He ran a hand through his hair, voice trembling slightly. "I've been alone for years. My marriage ended quietly, no fights, no drama, just distance. And when it did, I promised myself I'd never cross lines again, never blur them. Then you came along." I wanted to speak, but my throat closed, so I let him continue. "You remind me of something I thought I'd lost, care without expectation, warmth without demand. But every time I'm near you, I feel like I'm standing on a line I can't redraw." He exhaled, eyes glassy with exhaustion. "I'm terrified, Eli, of wanting something that could ruin everything I've built." I finally found my voice. "And I'm scared of being seen as broken. Like that's all anyone ever sees when they look at me." His gaze softened, pain melting into tenderness. "You're not broken. You don't know that." "I do," he said quietly. "Because you still want to heal." Something cracked open inside me then. A quiet surrender to the truth we'd both been pretending not to see. The storm outside had faded into a low hum, the occasional rumble of thunder like a heartbeat under the sky. The room was dim except for the light spilling from a single lamp, enough to paint soft shadows across his face. He reached out then, hesitant at first, fingertips brushing my hand. I didn't pull away. His touch was careful, reverent, as if he was asking permission with every inch. "I've thought about this more than I should," he whispered. "About us. About what it would mean if I stopped pretending." I turned my hand over, letting his fingers slide between mine. "Then don't pretend." He closed his eyes for a moment, like the words were both mercy and punishment. When he opened them again, something in him had shifted. The calm, composed doctor replaced by the man beneath, vulnerable and real. "I don't know where this goes," he said, "but right now I just want to be here." "Then stay," I said. He didn't move closer. He didn't have to. The space between us dissolved quietly, not with a kiss or a confession, but with shared silence that spoke louder than either could bear. He looked around the apartment. The chaos of sketches, the faint smell of turpentine, the evidence of someone barely holding things together, and said softly, "You've been fighting alone for too long." "And you?" I asked. He gave a weary smile. "Maybe I have too." The air felt thick with everything unspoken. I could hear the rain returning, a gentle rhythm against the window pane. He squeezed my hand, a simple human gesture that felt heavier than any declaration. His thumb brushed across my knuckles once, twice, before settling there. Neither of us spoke again for a long time. The silence was not awkward or empty. It was full of years of longing, of all the things we hadn't let ourselves admit until now. I studied his face in the dim light, the tired eyes, the faint lines at the corners, the quiet strength that had drawn me in from the start. And for the first time, he didn't look untouchable. He just looked real. When I finally leaned back, I whispered, "You're still wearing your coat." He looked down, laughed quietly, then slipped it off. "Guess I didn't plan on staying this long. Guess I didn't plan on needing you this much," I said, barely audible. He didn't answer, but his hand tightened around mine. Not possessive, just steady, like an anchor. The lamp flickered once, and in that half-dark, half-light moment, something in his expression softened completely. He looked at me not like a patient, but like a man he'd been waiting for. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I could breathe again. The morning after that night felt fragile, like the world might break if I moved too fast. Adrian had left quietly, just before sunrise. The last thing he said before stepping out the door was, "Take care of yourself today." No promises, no goodbyes, just a simple sentence that somehow carried the weight of everything we hadn't dared to say. For a while, things felt almost peaceful. I slept through an entire night for the first time in months. My chest didn't feel as heavy. My hands didn't shake when I painted. It was as if the storm had passed, leaving behind still air and soft light. But peace, I learned, has an expiration date. 2 weeks later, I began to notice it, whispers, small things that didn't make sense at first. A nurse at the clinic who avoided eye contact. A message from the receptionist that my appointments were being rescheduled. A curt email from Adrian himself. "It's best if we pause communication for a while. I hope you understand." The words didn't sound like him, too formal, too distant. But I did understand. Someone must have seen him leave my apartment that night. Someone who knew he wasn't supposed to be there. Rumors have their own gravity. They don't need proof to pull people apart, only silence and fear. I didn't respond to his message. What could I have said? That it didn't matter what anyone thought? That I didn't care about his reputation? But I did care. I cared about him, enough to know what that kind of exposure could do to a man like him. So I stayed quiet. Days turned to weeks again, then months. I threw myself into work. Finished commissions I'd ignored for too long. Started new ones that felt closer to truth. My art began to shift, less polished, more raw. I painted without restraint, as if trying to pour every unanswered word into color and line. I also started therapy finally. The first session felt like walking barefoot over glass, but it got easier. The therapist asked, "What do you want to heal from?" And I said, "From needing to be seen by someone to believe I exist." That answer stayed with me. I saw Adrian once after that, across the street weeks later. He was leaving the clinic, head bowed, coat buttoned tight against the wind. He didn't see me, or maybe he did and decided not to. Either way, I didn't call out. A month later, the news came quietly, through one of the nurses who followed my art page online. "Dr. Cole's gone," she commented on one of my posts. "Left the clinic. Said he needed a change." That was it. No explanation, no farewell. Just gone. For days, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd lost something irreplaceable. Not love, exactly, but the version of myself that had existed only when he was around. The version that believed someone could look at me without flinching. Still, life went on. It always does. I began teaching small art classes on weekends, mostly to kids and retired locals. Watching them paint with joy reminded me what creation was supposed to feel like. Not escape, not therapy, just life. Then, one afternoon, while helping clean up after a session, my phone buzzed with a message from Lauren, the same friend who'd been there the night I fainted months ago. Guess who opened a new practice in Riverton Square? Dr. Cole. Private office. Small place. Looks peaceful. I just stared at the screen, my heart suddenly too loud in my chest. Riverton Square was across the city, not far, but far enough to feel like a deliberate distance. I typed out a dozen replies, but they all felt wrong. That's great for him. Good to know. I'm happy he's okay. I deleted them all. That night, I sat by my window, watching the streetlights shimmer against the pavement. My reflection stared back from the glass. Older somehow, steadier, but lonelier too. Should I go see him? The thought looped endlessly. Part of me wanted to walk into that new clinic, sit in the waiting room, and let him see what he'd helped me become. Not broken, not dependent, just whole. Another part of me wanted to stay away forever, because if I saw him again, I wasn't sure I'd have the strength to leave a second time. Pride argued with longing, logic with heart, and in the end I did nothing. A few weeks later, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. Cream-colored, no return address. The handwriting on it was instantly recognizable. Neat, deliberate, and unmistakably his. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. Eli, I hope this reaches you well. I've thought about writing for a long time but wanted to wait until I could say what needed saying without fear or apology. I'm still learning how to live with the choices I've made, and the ones I was too afraid to. Leaving the clinic was the hardest decision of my life, but it was necessary. The lines between what was right and what was real blurred beyond recognition, and I needed to find clarity again. Please know that nothing about what we shared was a mistake. You reminded me that care doesn't always belong to rules. Sometimes it belongs to the people brave enough to feel it anyway. I've opened a small practice here. It's quiet. I keep the lights soft, the air warm, and sometimes I still think of you when it rains. If you ever need a closer look at your heart, you know where to find me. Adrian. I read the letter 3 times, maybe more. Each line hit differently. Tenderness folded inside restraint. Love hidden beneath professional language. The kind of message written by a man who couldn't say what he truly wanted to. I sat there for a long time, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of rain. That same clean, electric promise of a storm. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside my sketchbook, between pages filled with drawings of him, of us, of the spaces we once shared. And then, for the first time in a long time, I smiled. Because even if we never found our way back to each other, he had given me something I hadn't known how to find before. Permission to keep my heart open. The risk of being real had broken us apart, but it had also made me whole. And somehow that was enough. The letter stayed with me for weeks. Folded neatly inside my sketchbook, carried from one room to another like a quiet promise I couldn't throw away. Sometimes I'd take it out just to trace the handwriting with my thumb, to remind myself it was real, that he was real. But reality has a way of pulling you forward, even when part of you still lives in the past. The classes I taught began to fill up. My name started showing up in small galleries again. People called my work raw and honest. And I tried not to think about who had taught me what honesty could look like. Then one Saturday morning, while cleaning out my studio, the wind caught a few papers off the table, sketches fluttering to the floor. One landed face up. The portrait I'd drawn of him months ago, back when all I knew of him was a voice that made me feel safe. I stared at it for a long time, and then I made up my mind. Riverton Square looked exactly like I remembered. Narrow streets lined with brick buildings, trees shedding early leaves that swirled in soft gold patterns underfoot. The rain had come and gone, leaving the air sharp and clean. His new clinic sat on a quiet corner, the name Cole Heart and Wellness, etched in simple bronze letters by the door. No glossy advertisements, no polished plaques. Just glass, wood, and light. I hesitated before going in, my reflection caught in the window, older, calmer, but still uncertain. The door handle felt cool under my fingers as I finally pushed it open. A soft chime rang. The scent of lavender and fresh coffee filled the air. The place didn't feel like a clinic at all. More like an art space, minimalist and warm. Wooden shelves, plants, sunlight spilling across a low table stacked with books. And there he was. Adrian looked up from a stack of folders, surprise flickering across his face before breaking into something gentler. A quiet, disbelieving smile. "Eli." "Hey," I said softly. My heart was loud enough that I barely heard my own voice. He set the papers down, hands stilling as if afraid any movement might break the moment. "I didn't think you'd come." "I didn't either," I admitted. "But I got your letter." A long pause, just enough time for our eyes to meet, for everything unsaid to settle between us like familiar dust. Then, almost cautiously, he stepped closer. "You look good," he said finally. "So do you," I said. "Less tired." He smiled faintly. "That's because I actually sleep now. Fewer rules to chase here." I let out a quiet laugh. "That sounds like freedom." "Maybe it is." We stood there for a while, the silence not awkward this time, just full of recognition. Two people who had already said everything once without words. He gestured toward a chair. "Sit, please." I did, taking in the space again. On one wall hung a few small paintings, soft abstracts, mostly in muted blues and greens. They weren't mine, but they felt familiar somehow. "You've been painting," I said, surprised. He nodded. "Therapy. You inspired that." I smiled. "Guess we both started over." He sat across from me, elbows resting lightly on his knees. "I wasn't sure if I had the right to reach out," he said. "After everything that happened." "You did," I said quietly. "Because you didn't just walk away from me. You walked away from the part of yourself that cared. And I think you missed him. That hit something in him." His eyes softened, mouth curving in that same small, sad smile I remembered. "I did," he said. "I missed who I was when I was with you. Not the doctor, just the man." The words filled the room like warmth. "I thought about you," I admitted. "Every time I painted something honest, I realized I was trying to find that same calm I felt in your office. That space where I didn't have to hide." He nodded slowly. "That was never about medicine, was it?" "No," I said. "It was about being seen." We both fell silent again, but this time the quiet felt steady, like peace rather than fear. I reached into my bag, pulling out a wrapped canvas. "I brought you something." He looked startled. "For me?" "Yeah." I stood and set it on the table, unwrapping it carefully. The light caught the edges of the frame as I turned it toward him. The painting was abstract, swirls of white, gray, and soft amber, converging around a faint outline of two figures separated by a line of light. The title written discreetly at the bottom corner, "The Closer Exam." He stared at it for a long time, saying nothing. His throat worked like he was swallowing words too fragile to speak. Finally, he exhaled. "That first day," he murmured, "you were trembling, and I told you you needed a closer exam." "I remember," I said. "You closed the door." And for some reason, it felt like the first time I could breathe. He smiled, not wistful this time, but real. "Maybe now we can stop pretending we're not meant to be in each other's care." The words hung there, soft but certain. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him. The faint lines at the corner of his eyes, the calm steadiness that had once scared me with how much I wanted it. "Are you sure?" I asked quietly. "This time, there's no clinic to blame. No lines to hide behind." He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the reflection of the painting in his eyes. "I'm sure." The air between us felt different. Not charged with tension like before, but with recognition. Two lives that had already broken and rebuilt themselves finally aligning where they were always meant to. When he reached for my hand, it was with the same careful patience as before. But this time, there was no fear in it, just intent. Our fingers interlaced. I could feel his pulse against mine, steady, human. He whispered, "You've always been the reason I remember what care is supposed to feel like. And you," I said, "are the reason I finally stopped calling myself broken." The silence that followed was full of things neither of us needed to say. Then he leaned in, slow, deliberate, and kissed me. It wasn't urgent or dramatic. It was quiet, almost reverent. The kind of kiss that says, "We've already waited long enough." When we pulled back, the sunlight had shifted, filling the room in soft amber. He smiled, thumb brushing lightly across my hand. "Stay a while." I nodded. "I was hoping you'd ask." We stood there, side by side, looking at the painting again, the two figures, the light between them. Only now it didn't feel like separation. It felt like the moment before connection. Outside, the faint rumble of distant thunder began again, but it wasn't threatening this time. It was gentle, a reminder of where we'd been and how far we'd come. For the first time, I realized the rain no longer scared me. It was just another kind of silence we'd learned how to share. And in that quiet clinic full of light and second chances, I knew this wasn't the end of our story. It was the beginning of finally being real. The gallery smelled faintly of varnish and rain, the kind of mix that carried memory in every breath. Months had passed since I last saw Adrian in that quiet, sunlit clinic, but time hadn't dulled what grew between us. It had only refined it, like art after countless revisions, still imperfect but finally honest. The exhibition was called Healing, not by accident. When I chose the title, I didn't think of medicine or recovery. I thought of the quiet way he used to say my name when I was unraveling, the steadiness of his hand on my pulse, the nights when silence spoke louder than any prescription. The space filled slowly, friends, artists, former students. Faces blurred together in soft laughter, the clinking of glasses, the shuffle of shoes against the polished floor. My paintings hung in warm light, abstract forms of tenderness and resilience, wounds transformed into color. And then, as I turned from greeting someone, I saw him. Adrian stood near the back wall, hands folded loosely in front of him. He looked the same and yet not, no longer the man hidden behind professional calm, but one who carried his piece like something hard-won. When our eyes met, he smiled, small, genuine, a smile that said, "I'm proud of you." I didn't rush to him. I didn't have to. His presence alone was enough to steady me. Later, when the speeches ended and the lights dimmed to a soft amber glow, he finally approached. I could feel him before I saw him, the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needed to hide. "You didn't tell me it would look like this," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "I wasn't sure it would," I admitted. "Half of these came from nights I didn't think I'd make it through." He looked around the room, the brushstrokes, the colors, the way the pieces fit together like fragments of an unspoken confession. "It's beautiful," he said. "You're beautiful in it." I felt warmth rise in my chest, not embarrassment, just gratitude. "I wanted it to feel like breathing," I said, "like the kind of healing that doesn't erase the scar, just teaches you how to live with it." He nodded slowly. "That's the only kind that lasts." We walked together, weaving through the quiet crowd, pausing in front of a large canvas. A swirl of whites, ochres, and gray. Two indistinct figures stood near each other, light spilling between them like forgiveness. The title, printed neatly below, read, "Healing Hands." He smiled faintly. "That one's mine, isn't it?" "Maybe," I said softly. "Or maybe it's ours." For a while we said nothing. The murmurs of the room faded, replaced by the soft hum of music and rain beginning to patter against the windows. I noticed a few familiar faces glance our way. Friends who knew enough not to ask, who understood that some stories didn't need to be explained. Our relationship wasn't a secret anymore, but it wasn't a performance either. We didn't owe the world a declaration. What we had existed in quiet gestures, a shared glance, a hand brushing another's in a crowd, a warmth that didn't need to be named to be known. When I looked at him now, I saw not the doctor who'd once examined me under harsh light, but the man who had stayed long enough to understand what couldn't be measured, what couldn't be fixed, only held. He reached for my hand, fingers intertwining with ease, as though they'd always belonged there. He once told me I needed a closer exam. I murmured, half to him, half to the air. Turns out, it wasn't my body that needed healing. It was my heart. He smiled, thumb brushing against my knuckles. And, I said, looking around the room, at the light, the laughter, the peace that had once felt impossible. I think it finally listened. The rain outside thickened, drumming softly on the glass walls. People began to gather near the doors, some slipping out with umbrellas, others waiting for the downpour to ease. Adrian and I stayed where we were. Neither of us moved toward the exit. He looked toward the window and back at me. Seems like it's always raining when something begins with us. I laughed quietly. Maybe it's just the world's way of giving us privacy. He chuckled, then leaned closer. Not a grand gesture, not something cinematic, just a gentle, simple kiss. A moment that existed only in warmth and breath, in the soft rhythm of rain against glass. When we pulled apart, the lights from the street cast faint reflections across the wet floor, shifting patterns that made it look like we were standing in moving water. I thought of the first night I'd met him. The faint scent of antiseptic and rain, the trembling in my hands, the way his voice had steadied me when I didn't even realize I was falling apart. Back then, I'd walked into his office hoping someone would tell me how to stop breaking. Now, I stood beside him knowing that sometimes breaking is just another word for becoming whole. We stayed until the gallery emptied. He helped me gather stray flyers and empty glasses, his movements quiet and deliberate. When I locked the door behind us, the rain was still falling, soft but unrelenting. He opened his umbrella, the same black one from that first storm, and held it over us. We walked together through the slick streets, the world blurred in reflections of light and water. No words were needed. The silence between us wasn't distance anymore. It was peace. As we neared the corner, he looked at me and said, "Do you ever think about how we got here?" "All the time," I said, "and I still can't believe it." He smiled, that same calm smile that had undone me once, and said, "Love doesn't always ask permission. Sometimes, it just walks in wearing a white coat and asks if you're ready to begin." I laughed, the sound soft against the rain. "And were you?" "Not then," he said, squeezing my hand. "But I am now." We turned down the next street, our footsteps echoing on the wet pavement. The rain didn't bother me anymore. For the first time, I didn't want to run from it, because this time I wasn't alone.